So guys, Dad came up with a brilliant idea for our tables. So one of the challenges when we're making our tables is number one, finding a way to hold the glass in place, and number two, finding different ways to do it. We don't want to do the same thing over and over again. So Dad came up with a really good idea that looks freaking awesome. So it seems like with every table, we make some new mistakes, and we made quite a few on this one. So let's show you guys what happened. So before we start, I gotta tell you guys, everything we use you can find on our website, makeawwoodsign.com, all the base plates, router bits, depth gauges, all that stuff. So head over to the website and check it out, see if there's something you can use. All right guys, so right off the bat, we made several mistakes. Mistake number one, we didn't film putting the board together, but we did it the way we do pretty much all of our edge glue ups. So I'll leave some videos in the description so you can go check that out. Mistake number two is once the board was put together and surfaced and sanded, we left it out here flat on the table, so it actually cupped. So what we did is we put a 2x6 on each edge, and we clamped it to that flat 2x6 to flatten that board out. So now what we're going to do is we are going to actually put our braces in the back and leave it clamped in while we do that, and hopefully that will straighten it all out so we'll have a nice flat board to start off with.
For the bracing in the back, there's a lot of different things you can do, but we want it kind of hidden. So what we're going to do is we're actually using 3/4 inch angle iron, and we're cutting them in 18-inch pieces. What I'm going to do is cut cavities inside the back and embed these in there and then screw them in. When you're cutting angle iron or really doing any iron work at all, you want to make sure to wear safety glasses. I've had my eye scraped twice because of metal shavings getting in there. It's not fun, and I would avoid it if you can, because it sucks. So I'm drilling several holes in each piece of angle iron, and I'm making sure that they're big enough for the screws to go through. And the screws we're using are little pan head screws, but they're long enough to really sink that thing down in the cavities we're going to carve. We're using this Amana V-groove, and it's about 2 inches wide. It is a massive router bit. So we're using a straight edge, and I'm taking the cut 3 times. If I try to do this all in one, that thing might run away from me. It really takes out a ton of wood. Real quick guys, I apologize for the lighting in here. With working in the garage, we're trying to figure out the lighting. We're getting a little bit better, but there's still some dark and some light, so bear with us just a little bit. It will get better, I promise. You want to make sure that that cavity you cut is deep enough to where that angle iron sits below the surface. Now where that becomes kind of an issue is how deep you're going to carve. But we knew in this one we're not doing any power carving, we're just going to carve with the routers. So about 1/4 inch is as deep as we're going to go. We put one brace in the very middle and then one brace about 6 inches in from each end. And the way we figured it is that's going to be plenty of strength to keep this thing from cupping or from warping. And that seems to work really well. Now to install the braces, Dad's starting the screws with the drill, but we're going to hand tighten them with the screwdriver. Because with something like this, for some reason, it's really easy to strip it out. And you want to make sure you have a good tight fit in each one of those screws. That way there's no play in there and they stay nice and tight. And the cool thing about this is even the underside of the table looks very symmetrical and it looks really nice. Now we're going to see if our little okie rig trick works. And it actually did. Dad did this once before on the box he made for the back of his truck, and I'm pretty impressed with how much of this it actually took out. There's still a little bit of variation in the board, but we're going to put glass on top of it, so it's really not that big a deal. For the layout on this, we used our inkjet transfer process. Now this process I really like, but to be honest, it is frustrating, especially when you have something massive like this. I think this whole layout process was like 12 pages that you have to cut and put together like a puzzle, but you have to put it together without touching any of the ink because it'll smear. I'll put a link in the description below for a video based solely on this because there's a lot that goes into this. Once you do it a few times, it gets a lot easier, but your first few times, I would recommend starting out with something small, 1 or 2 pages, just to kind of get the hang of it. but it transfers great if you do it right. And this one turned out really good. This whole process took us maybe 45 minutes to an hour just to get the artwork on the board. So now that the board's made, the transfer's done, it's all braced up, we're ready to go. Oh, and one other thing, I put 2 coats of clear on this before I started carving. Otherwise, it can smudge as you're moving the router around and as you're moving your hands. But I started off with the carving liner bit to do all the small details. Now it can be kind of difficult to figure out what you need the carving liner for versus what you can use the profile bit for. You want to use the carving liner sparingly. It's great for small details. It's the best bit we've ever used for small details. But you want to avoid using it if you don't have to, because it will dull faster and you can only go 1/8 of an inch deep at a time. If you go any deeper than that, especially on hardwood, which this isn't, this is redwood, but you want to be careful not to go any deeper than 1/8 of an inch simply because it can break. It's really, really fine tipped. And I forgot to mention in the intro, we will have links in the description for everything we use, for all of our router bits, for the base plates, all the different stuff we use to carve tables or signs or whatever. So head on over to makeawoodsign.com and check it out. Now that all my fine detail work is done, I'm putting in the profile bit at 3/16 of an inch deep. Now, a lot of people get intimidated when it comes to carving a big project like this, and that's totally understandable. It really is intimidating, but there's an old saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So if you trust your layout, and if you've gone over it and you make sure everything looks exactly the way it's supposed to before you start carving, all you have to do is follow the lines. You really need to trust the process and trust your layout, because that is the biggest aspect of carving. Keeping straight lines, obviously you want to do that too, but the layout is a huge part of having the confidence that what you're carving is exactly what's supposed to be done. Now, I did make a few mistakes in the carving on here, but I'm not going to point them out. That's up to you guys to try to find. And if you find them, leave a comment, because I'm kind of curious how noticeable they are to you guys. One thing you want to make sure you do when you're going from the carving liner to the profile bit is blend your lines. So if the carving liner has some really thin lines and then you're going to meet that up with the profile bit, go over everything you can. You want it to have the same depth and the same width if it's possible. There's going to be areas and times where that's not possible because there's such fine detail, but you want to try to blend everything in. When you have a thick line going right up to a thin line, it's pretty noticeable, so you want to try to avoid that if possible. Now that the profile work's done, I'm putting in my 90-degree bit to go in and get all of the black out of there. So the profile bit is the most versatile bit, for sure. We use that the absolute most. But just like everything, not only in woodworking, but in mechanics and anything when it comes to tools, you need to use the right tool for the right job. The 90-degree bit takes out a lot of wood. If you were to try to take all of this out with a profile bit or even the 60-degree bit, it would take forever and it would really beat the crap out of your bits. So the 90-degree is perfect for this job. And if you notice, I'm actually using the Hercules cordless router from Harbor Freight. We got that about 4 months ago, and we're going to do another video in the update on that. This little thing is awesome. It's quite a bit cheaper. I think it was only like 80 bucks out the door. So if you guys are just getting into carving, or if you need a dedicated router for one bit, I recommend this thing. It's pretty impressive. Now here's a part of the carving process that I think is overlooked a lot, and I'm pretty much speaking to myself. We use a stiff bristle brush after all the carving is done, because there's always a lot of sawdust and a lot of chips that get trapped in there. So you can see I'm spraying the primer here. If you don't brush it out and then you just spray over all that stuff, once you're done sanding and you blow all that sawdust out of there, you're going to have a lot of white spots. So especially with something this big and when you have a lot of texture in the background, make sure you just take a few extra minutes and really brush it, because there's stuff that gets stuck in there And the wetter the wood is, if your moisture content is at like 12 or 15%, it's going to get stuck even worse. So make sure you brush out all of your carving before you spray and sand. Now the sanding on this was done with an 80 grit disc on the disc sander and 120 grit on the random orbital. And it was pretty tricky not to mess up all the black on there because there's a lot of small little areas. Redwood can get really chippy, so if you're using redwood and you have a lot of small detailed areas that are outset, like the middle of the horse chest right there, you want to be careful and take your time because that stuff can chip out pretty easily. For the clear coat on the tabletop, we used Helmsman water-based urethane. Now we're going to put more on here once the edge is on, but I wanted to make sure that all that end grain was protected and it had a good clear coat on it before we even started with the edge. For the edge that Dad came up with, we're using Redwood 2x4s and we cut them down to about 2 inches. Now each one of these pieces was actually cut probably 8 to 12 inches longer than we actually needed. When it comes to making miters and things like that and frames, me and Dad are not the best. I will say we're getting better, but it's not really our forte. So we made sure to give ourselves plenty of wiggle room to cut the pieces to size exactly as we need them. Once we had the 2x4s ripped down and cut to length, then we made the dado joint. So we wanted to have this dado joint fit fairly tight, but we also wanted to give it enough room to where we didn't have to smack them on there and really get a tight fit. So since the filming of this, we actually got a dado blade, and my gosh, that cuts the time down like by 2/3. But we didn't have that while we were doing this, so we just measured and made a bunch of different cuts to get as much of that groove out of there as we could. Once all the cuts were made, then we used a chisel to get all the remaining pieces out of there and flatten it out. Now one thing I wasn't counting on with the dado blade that we got is it actually gives a much smoother surface. Even though inside that groove I used a chisel to get all the pieces, and then I actually used a piece of sandpaper on a block and I sanded the heck out of these things. It was still kind of uneven, a little bit rough. I mean, I spent 15-20 minutes sanding these, but the dado blade gave us a much smoother cut, and that's what we're going to be using from now on. This was the tricky part, figuring out how to make these miters look good. So we took one of the long pieces and we cut a 45 at, lined it up, and then used a little square to give us a 45 degree for the other side. But that actually made it too long. So what we found out is if we just mark the inside of the dado where the corner goes just like that, and then make our 45 cut based on that, it actually wasn't that hard. One thing that we made sure to do is make several cuts and kind of inch our way closer to that line. That way we don't cut too much at one time. We also have this little practice piece right here to make sure that the opposite corner is going to line up too. The biggest piece of advice I can give anybody out there that wants to do something like this is to dry fit your pieces first. Make sure that they're each one exactly how you want to be. You're going to have some fill. Well, at least we had some fill. Maybe you guys are like freaking top-notch woodworkers or carpenters. Dad and I, we just kind of make it work however we make it work. But dry fit them, make sure that everything goes on right exactly as you want before you glue anything. Once we did that and we got the pieces clamped up and we made sure that everything was where we wanted it, we used glue and we used little finish nails to put those pieces on one at a time. For some reason, I completely forgot to film all the fill work we did, but we filled each one of the nail holes and all the miters, and we used those fill sticks that Dad got a while back. I love those things. They are awesome. I will actually leave a link in the description below because, man, they work really well, and even with a clear coat on them, you can't even hardly see the fill. Once the fill was done, we put a chamfer on the inside and outside of the frame and we sanded it off. We also threw about 10 more coats of clear on the entire tabletop to give it a nice glossy finish. Now once that dried, then we had to install the legs. We got this little table base on Amazon for like 80 bucks, I think. We don't really do metal work. Me or Dad can't weld, so we don't make our own bases as of yet. Eventually, we hope to get to that point. For each one of our tables, instead of just screwing the table legs into the bottom of the tabletop, we actually install inserts for a few different reasons. Number one, it looks a lot better and it holds a lot better. And number two, it makes it a lot easier to disassemble to transport. So we're going to do some shows where we're selling our tables and we have a rack that we're going to display the tabletops on. With the inserts, it allows us to sell the tabletop and then give the customer the box with the table legs, and we make sure that those are the right ones. And all they have to do is put little screws into the inserts. It holds better, it looks better, it's much more professional. We ended up doing this on each one of our tables. So a little sales tip is the easier you make it for the customer, the more likely they are to buy, and the more likely they are to come back and buy from you again. You want to give the customer the least amount of hassle and make their life as easy as you can when it comes to your product. Now we just put the glass in. Now our buddy over at Dave's Glass and Mirror in Kingman, he does a great job. We have him do all of our glass. We just give him the measurements and he's done all kinds of crazy stuff for us. So if you're in the area and you need somebody to do glass for you, Dave is the man.
There it is, you guys. This one came out awesome. What I really like about this table, especially the edge Dad came up with, it's just really clean looking. It's very simple, very clean, almost like elegant, if you will. I hope you guys liked it. Remember, you can find everything we used on our website, makeawoodsign.com. If you got any questions or you want to buy a table, shoot me an email, Ryan@makeawoodsign.com, and we're happy to help. All right, we'll see you guys on the next one. Bye.